Welcome to WorldviewTube's Washington Report on this December 2nd, 2025. We've been off for what feels like forever, but I'm going to welcome back my co-host Jim Pfaff of theconservativecaucus.org. Jim, how are you doing?
Doing well, and we did remain in the minds of people through the repetition of certain previous programs, all of which are relevant and exciting. So we're glad that everyone got to see us even when we weren't physically there.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Well, we have a lot to go. There was a lot happened while we were gone. Trump and Tim Walz. Trump been going pretty hard against Tim Walz, rightfully so. We have more news on Venezuela with the Pentagon doing a press briefing this morning and more. But let's start with what's going on in Minnesota. So there's a bunch of tax fraud going on, correct? I mean, there's Somalis in Minnesota who are funneling money into these charities. Is that correct? The Somali charities?
Well, what happened is a lot of federal government money, as well as some state government money, had gone into these programs that were created. This is why, by the way, everyone got all upset with Thomas Massie for calling a vote on the CARES Act in spring of 2020. And I mean, people, even some of his fellow conservative members were upset with him for doing this. They were going to voice vote $2.5 trillion, like voice vote $2.5 trillion. And they got all upset because he called for it. The bill was a boondoggle. This is actually part of that boondoggle. Of course, it expanded during the Biden administration as well. This was a program that was supposed to provide meals and help for poor children who needed it. And so various states got some of this money. And it turns out about $1 billion of this money was literally being laundered into organizations that were reporting the feeding of, in some instances, up to 40,000 children, and they weren't feeding anybody. They were filling out the reports. They were submitting it to the state for reimbursement. The state reimbursed it. It turns out that Donald Trump's not the biggest and only detractor of Tim Walz in this situation. It turns out that the Department of Human Services in the Minnesota state government, which is probably filled with a lot of leftist Democrats, they're Tim Walz's biggest critic. They have an X handle out there where they are showing over and over again with documentation, with clear assertions that they had been calling on Tim Walz to stop this fraud, and he refused to do it. They're literally saying that. They are accusing him directly of fraud. Now, it is not very common in American life that government employees at the state or federal level are willing to do such or say such things. That's how bad this situation was. So it turns out about $1 billion was moved into the hands of mostly large Somali-focused, because there's a large Somalian expatriate community in Minnesota, Somali-focused NGOs. And there is evidence, because Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is investigating it, that some of this money went into the Boko Haram terrorist organization in Somalia. So this is a huge, huge story. Frankly, it's the tip of the iceberg. It's so funny because we're seeing so much fraud that's come out there now. And I think we have a clip with Elon Musk talking about DOGE here in a minute. There's so much fraud out there that this story hits the tip of an iceberg everyone is seeing, that is really the tip of a massive fraud effort to the tune of literally hundreds of billions, nay, maybe trillions of dollars in state and federal money that is being laundered into organizations, many of whom are doing political work against Republicans and twisting our elections, but much of whom are enriching the people who help Democrats. This is a massive story, and this is only the beginning of it. We really do not know everything that's going on. This, by the way, real quickly, first got revealed by City Journal of the Manhattan Institute, and apparently some of these Minnesota state employees went to them to tell them what was going on, and that's how that began to roll out. I have to say, it's breathtaking, and it's not being reported in a breathtaking manner. It's all over the internet. It's all over social media. But you should have every major news outlet going hard after Tim Walz on this, and you're not seeing it as it should be, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, a lot of them are defending him. Even, I mean, they're questioning what Trump called him. I don't know if, I'm sure most people have seen Trump's tweet on Thanksgiving by now, but he took a dig at Tim Walz and called him a name that a lot of them are freaking out over. I mean, it's Trump. That's just him. But
it's total Trump. And by the way, I would only add to that the fact that, I remember when in Trump's first administration, a lot of Christians were saying, he's a David, he's a flawed person. No, he's a lot more like Nebuchadnezzar or Cyrus. That's why you see names like this coming out. And I think it's frankly a very healthy thing. These people do need to be called out. The Democrat Party is not only a Maoist communist socialist party right now. It is a corrupt party. I'm not saying that Republicans are free from any accusations of corruption. There are definitely corrupt Republicans as well, too. But as a method of operation, the Democrat Party is a corrupt party that gives our tax dollars illegally and illicitly to their political benefactors. And they are twisting our elections and our government institutions in a manner to benefit them. This all went on steroids with Barack Obama, and it got another steroid juice during the Biden administration. This is a huge story.
Yeah, and like you said, there's an investigation. President Trump's Small Business Administration just ordered an investigation into Tim Walz, Minnesota, overseeing multiple organizations defrauding the taxpayer through SBA loans. And even the local news there in Minnesota is reporting on it. Let's see what they're saying about it. One second here.
That's what the federal government is now investigating. Could some of the money stolen in one of Minnesota's fraud cases have gone to a terrorist group? That's what the federal government is now investigating. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent blames Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and the Biden administration, saying they are investigating allegations that hardworking Minnesotans' tax dollars may have been diverted to the terrorist organization Al-Shabaab. Republican members of the Minnesota delegation called on the U.S. attorney to investigate those allegations late last month. President Donald Trump has repeatedly blamed Governor Walz and Minnesota's Somali community for fraud and crimes in the state.
All right. So are they saying that some of these charities that it's going off to, or then that money is then being funneled to potentially terrorist organizations as well?
Yeah, that's what I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
There is apparent evidence. So I'm hearing and reading about, and Secretary Bessent is referring to, that some of this money is getting funneled into Somalia to Boko Haram, which is a horrible terrorist organization based in Somalia. And listen, we do need to understand something. We are in a time that is unprecedented in world history in terms of the scale of this kind of corruption. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln complained, and others, about the contractors who were scamming the federal government if they could with stupid crap that they were creating, bad food, supplies that were poorly put together, because they knew in a rush they needed to get all this, and folks would cut corners. There's always some degree or level of corruption in government contracting. We need to understand that as a foundational thing. When you start spending multiple trillions of dollars from the federal government, over $7 trillion a year, and in all state and local governments on the tune of probably getting somewhere near $20 trillion a year. I mean, keep in mind, this is $27 trillion. It's somewhere between $20 and $27 trillion a year that go through all government institutions in this country. How do you think you're going to keep away from corruption? One of the greatest arguments for getting rid of the size of government that we have is the massive corruption that's involved. The corruption of employees who sit at their desks and do nothing or do other nefarious things under the power of law, or in this more modern era of it, these non-government organizations that are receiving tens and hundreds of billions of dollars that are enriching political provocateurs and causing harm to the American people. This is so big. I just hope that somehow we wake up to this, because we need to be delivered from this nightmare.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people who don't believe, in all the corruption. How could you not have corruption? I mean, that's just how people are. There's corruption everywhere else. Why would there not be corruption in the government, for Pete's sake? Well, I mean, where you have the most power.
You've heard me say it many times, Logan. 6,000 years of recorded human history proves the moral depravity of mankind. Mm-hmm. You cannot show me anywhere in the historical record where corruption was not the case. This is the main argument, in my opinion, against having government that isn't severely limited in its ability to operate, because it will go corrupt. People will take advantage of it. You'll have the government employees and the political actors taking advantage of it for themselves, for their power, and for money. But you also, in some degree, and this is one of our challenges, you will have an electorate that is willing to vote for those who will give them money at the expense of others. Uh-huh. This is something that Frédéric Bastiat, the famous French political philosopher, talked about. And is a very serious part of what we do. We as Americans have to decide that we do not want any more to receive money from the government for the thing we want, because we're also getting our money taken away and given to others. But what's worse is that, to the tune of trillions of dollars, that money is going to political actors to enrich them, and they provide nothing to society of any benefit.
Yep. And we'll play that. We have just a few minutes till we have to go to break. We have an Elon clip on just the scale of fraud in the government. But since you talked about how people will vote, to take money from others to benefit them, let's play this short clip real quick before we go to break of David Marcus. He's a socialist, right? Is he running for office?
I can't remember if he is or not.
Well, let's play this. He was on Fox News recently. Let's play this.
Mamdani is going to be the next mayor of New York. He's obviously a democratic socialist. And a lot of Republicans have kind of said, watch and see what happens to New York. That's going to be the death of socialism. You don't necessarily think that's the case?
No, I don't. And thanks for having me, John. Also, the conventional wisdom regarding Mamdani was that his victory was going to be a boon for Republicans in the midterms, because they could just point at socialism and say, there's the boogeyman. I don't think that this is going to work. I think there is a real misreading of the ground in Middle America, the heartland, call it whatever you want. I spend most of my time there talking to voters, and they're not terrified of socialism, and they're not the conservative, what we used to call blue dog Democrat types that you expect to find there. One quick example, two 30-somethings that I met in Dallas, these guys were Democrats, but not hardcore. Socialism came up. I asked a question that we hear a lot on this channel: where has it ever worked? Without missing a beat, the first guy said Norway. Second guy chimes in and says Sweden and Finland. Now, look, we can debate that, and we kind of did, those models, but the takeaway here is that when I said socialism, their mental image was not bread lines in Cuba or the former Soviet Union. It was free healthcare and generous vacation packages in Scandinavia. So I think Republicans have to understand the ground is a little different than they think it is right now.
All right. Sorry, I got that wrong. David Marcus is just a columnist for Fox. But what he's reporting on is how people are opening up to socialism, especially younger people all over the country.
Well, we're in such a relativistic society that the terms and definitions of things are hard for people sometimes to discern. There's the logical concept of equivocation, which is using a term to mean something that it doesn't mean. And this is actually a common form of argument. So the reason I call Democrats Maoist communists is because they are, first of all, they do the shame game. This was part of the Cultural Revolution that Mao undertook in China. And then communism, which is literally taking over the means of production. You know, Obamacare is a communist construct. The means of production are run by government, just in a manner that doesn't make it look that way. So anyway, the definitions and terms aren't there. The reason that David Marcus is correct in what he said is that your average American may not understand what socialism actually is. And they do see examples of large government programs in other countries. And he is right. There is an argument that these Scandinavian countries aren't at all socialist. And in fact, there are even more leftists in some of those countries who will say, no, we're not a socialist country at all. But technically, that is what it's touted as. And people will vote for Democrats thinking that they're that kind of socialist. Mm-hmm. But in reality, what they are is real socialists. The Democrats will tout the so-called socialism of Scandinavian countries, but what they want to do in policy is something far different, and it is a communist structure. So we can talk about more after the break.
Yep, we'll be right back here in just a moment.
Introducing the Sentry Wellness System, the ultimate under-sink water treatment solution designed with you in mind. Say goodbye to harmful toxins and hello to water enriched with essential nutrients like calcium and magnesium. Enjoy the benefits of increased pH for on-demand alkalinity. All from a zero-waste system that fits seamlessly into your home. Installation is a breeze, taking just 15 minutes, so you can have clean, healthy, great-tasting water straight from your tap. Perfect for apartments, homes, rentals, and even RVs. Elevate your hydration and well-being with the Sentry Wellness System because you deserve the best in every drop.
Sentry H2O. Tap into wellness.
News is moving faster than ever, and so are we. WorldviewTube brings you 24/7 live stream coverage and now real-time alerts when it matters most. Once you have the WorldviewTube app installed, exit the app and navigate your way to Settings. In Settings, locate the tab labeled Notifications. Select the Notifications tab. Scroll down until you locate the WorldviewTube app icon. Select the tab, and here you can turn on and customize your notification experience for the WorldviewTube app. News doesn't wait, and neither should you. Turn on push notifications to stay informed. Every headline as it happens.
All right, welcome back from the break. We left off talking about, the rise of voters who are open to voting for candidates who call themselves, socialist or whatever they call themselves. Really, it's all about what they tell the voters, though, and what they promise the voters and that they're going to give them. That's what we saw with Mom Donnie. We're going to give you free rent and free bus rides and not free rent, but rent controls, free bus rides, grocery stores that are price controlled and all that stuff. It's all about what they can do for them, right?
Yeah, and what people are observing politically is something that Gen Z and most millennials haven't observed politically that has taken place before. This promise of free things has been made at various times, mostly through the 20th century, somewhat through the 19th century as well, too, but really, the socialist struggles in the late 19th century were over labor issues. They weren't so much about what we would give you, although wages was part of that discussion. It was mostly about fomenting an envy of those who were the wealthy, who were claimed to be taking advantage of the worker. That shifted later in the 20th century, particularly in the post-World War II era, where beginning in Great Britain and other countries in Europe, the promise of free stuff was made. A little bit of the labor union stuff, but mostly the promise of welfare and being able to supplement your income and giving money to those who were more indigent. This saw its peak in the United States during the Great Society programs that were implemented by Lyndon Johnson. And that was the first. I mean, there was a welfare expansion during FDR's administration, but it was a massive, massive expansion since the 1960s, where in the black community, for example, prior to that time, you had stable families. In fact, for much of the 20th century, the marriage rate in the black community, which was suffering under Jim Crow and some other really horrid things, was much greater than in the white community in the first half of the 20th century. That radically shifted when money started getting thrown into particularly inner cities, really all over the country, but in inner cities during the Great Society programs. And now marriage rates, both white, black, in all communities, has dropped off. Of course, in the post-abortion period, we have birth rates that are below replacement level here in the United States because people are opting out of families. And so this promise of government and government payouts, whether it's direct welfare payments, whether it's a corporation that gets a special benefit so they don't have to worry about small companies coming up and competing with them, whether it's certain targeted tax breaks that aren't fair to everybody and focus on certain industries or certain people rather than industry more broadly or people more broadly. When you start dissecting the various things that government will throw out to other people, then you start building constituencies of voters who'll stay with you. This is why Social Security is the third rail of politics. And I can tell you this, if we were today to reform the Social Security system, to say that, just for example, every bit that your employer's tax for Social Security and that's taken out of your paycheck goes into an account you own, we would build wealth in the future that is beyond anything anyone can imagine. But no one wants to do it because they're afraid of the transition period where some people wouldn't benefit from that. And that kind of thing is destructive to a society, and we're living in the middle of it. So this is why you have, now this has gone to what you have in Minnesota right now. We've been throwing out all this money to people to pay them for various things in their lives, whether they really need it or not, transferring money from some Americans and giving it to others for so long. Now we're in the wealth transfer from Americans to political actors. And that's what's going on in Minnesota. That's what DOGE has revealed, and we'll play the Elon Musk thing. The scam is an outrageous place. And Donald Trump and Republicans, if they would just radically reform this, they are going to be benefited at the ballot box if they'll just do it. They think that they'll lose. I don't think that they would.
Yep. Yeah, they need to keep going. They need to go figure what's going on in Minnesota and then move on. And because this is definitely not an isolated incident. This is happening all over the country and at the federal level as well.
But because this socialism rant has taken on the particular form that you and I were just talking about, that actually is, at least for key segments of the voting population, that is a mantra that they'll follow because it seems to mean certain things to them. And that message has to be countered, not just to say, oh, these crabby socialists, but to actually talk about the benefits that people can get with limited government.
Yep. All right, well, let's play this Elon clip where he's going into the scale of this.
What did DOGE teach you if you learned one?
Well, it was like a very interesting side quest, because I just got to see like a lot of the inner workings of the government. There's been quite a few efficiencies. I mean, some of them are very basic efficiencies, like just adding in requirements for federal payments that any given payment must have an assigned congressional payment code and a comment field with something in it that's more than nothing. Like that trivial seeming change, my guess is probably saves $100 billion or even $200 billion a year. Because there were massive numbers of payments that were going out with no congressional payment code and with nothing in the comment field, which makes auditing the payments impossible. So they have to say, like, why can the Defense Department, or now the Department of War, why can it not pass an audit? It's because the information is not there. It doesn't have the information necessary to pass an audit does not exist, is the issue. So, so a bunch of things DOGE did were just very common sense things that would be normal for any organization that cared about financial responsibility. That's most of what was done. You know, and it's still going on, by the way. DOGE is still happening. But it turns out when you stop fraudulent and wasteful payments, the fraudsters don't, confess to this. They actually start yelling all sorts of nonsense that you're stopping essential payments to needy people. But actually, you're not. We get this thing like saying, oh, you've got to send this thing for whatever, it'd really be like, this is going to children in Africa. And I'm like, yeah, but then why are the wiring instructions for Deloitte and Touche in Washington, D.C.? Because that's not Africa. So can you please connect us with the recipients of this money in Africa? And then we get silence. I'm like, okay, we just want to literally talk to the recipients. That's it. And then we're like, oh no, it turns out for some reason we can't talk to them. I'm like, well, we're not going to send the money unless we can talk to the recipients and confirm they will actually get it. And that's sort of fraudsters necessarily will come up with a very sympathetic argument. They're not going to say, give us the money for fraud. That's not going to be what they say, obviously. They're going to try to make these sympathetic sounding arguments that are false.
They're going to start an NGO and then... Yeah,
they're going to see NGO... It's going to be like the Save the Baby Pandas NGO, which is like, who doesn't want to save the baby pandas? They're adorable. But then it turns out no pandas are being saved, okay, in this thing. It's just going to a bunch of... It's just corruption, essentially. And you're like, well, can you send us a picture of the panda? And like, no. Okay. Well, how do we know it's going to the pandas then? That's what I'm saying.
All right. So they're masking a lot of most of this fraud with charity, and then it's never going, which we've talked about. It's never going to the actual cause that they're representing.
It's always about charity. It's always about taking care of the poor people. It's always about taking care of this or that thing. First of all, let's talk about welfare programs conceptually, just briefly. The only purpose for any welfare program, if you're going to do it, well, let's just start with this. The Constitution does not authorize Congress to grant any welfare of any sort at all. There is no authorization for this kind of government spending. That includes Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And it includes welfare payments, SNAP payments. It includes the CHIP program. All these things that we do. The federal government is not authorized to do it. Where you do these things and should do these things, if you do them at all, is in the state government. That's the first thing. Secondly, conceptually about welfare. The only purpose for any government to ever do a welfare payment is to get someone in the worst harm possible and help them. Now, there are a lot of arguments about how you might go about that, if you would go about it at all. But here's the last thing, and this is one of the most onerous problems that we've got in this debate. There are people in the progressive Christian movement who are, just to address one specific thing that Elon was talking about here, Save the Baby Pandas. There is an uproar in progressive Christianity. This is happening in Christianity Today. It's happening on the Holy Post podcast, for example. Phil Vischer and those people, former VeggieTales guy, other places, where they are saying that the cutoff of USAID money is literally killing hundreds of thousands of people in Africa. So this addresses specifically what Elon Musk is talking about. The money's not going to these people. There are not people dying because USAID money has been pulled off in Africa. They're not dying. I will say this, that reportedly there might be some people who are dying of AIDS, but when you look at reports that are happening there, and I'm not highly convinced of it, but it's one example that's out there. AIDS money was going to Africa to help people in homosexual lifestyles avoid getting AIDS through promoting contraception and by giving them AIDS-reducing drugs. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know that we don't need to legislate people's lifestyles specifically from government. That can be just as bad. They're going to stand or fall by their lifestyles. But we certainly do not need to be supporting the consequences of their lifestyle or helping them through the consequences of their lifestyle choices that they should not be making. Now, when you get this is where it gets real problematic when it comes to welfare, because like, well, yeah, but that's not a lifestyle change. They're in a dangerous situation. Well, here's the problem with that money going to USAID. You've got governments that are oppressing these people. I did a calculation. I did a research of where USAID funding was going in Africa. And I found out that I think it was 22 of 26 countries are authoritarian governments. Now, when Elon Musk says, okay, so you're going to give money to people in Africa, but it's going to a Deloitte and Touche account in Washington, D.C. or in New York City. That's literally what's happening. That money's going that way, and it's getting into the hands of these dictators in these dictatorial, sometimes fascist Marxist governments in Africa. It's not going to the people who need it. So the scam of government is broad and wide. If you are a professing believer in Christ and you think that we need to be spending any of this money through any government entity for any purpose, I'm sorry, but you're unbiblical. I'm sorry to tell you and give you this warning, but you are unbiblical. Your theology is wrong. You do not understand Scripture. Scripture never commands governments to do anything. God does command you to be helpful. And you should do that. But you should demand that government stop laundering your money into its purposes so that you can keep more of it yourself and then do God's will. I believe that this is one of the great crises in the church in this day and age. Every person who goes to a church should be demanding that the federal government stop welfare programs, stop all of these money laundering schemes, stop stealing our money from us for their purposes to maintain political power and to launder money into preferred groups and preferred individuals. It's got to stop. This is the kind of corruption that God judged in Israel. It's literally the same kind of corruption. And Christians better get it right on this. They're wrong about it right now. They're not acting appropriately.
Yeah, and if you really did believe that we should be helping them, then you would be against these groups who have been proven to be frauds and want it to stop so that other organizations or charities can do it themselves and not the government, who has been proven to be frauds, most of them.
Well, and Elon Musk talked about the accounting problems. There's no government agency that I'm aware of that's ever passed an audit. There might be one that I'm missing, and it's probably some small corner of something. Maybe someone's going to point that out. The Defense Department cannot account, by my last calculation, over recent audits in the last 10 to 20 years, they cannot account for up to $2 trillion. $2 trillion. I'm not saying all that money wasn't spent. They can't account for it. If you did that, they've in this century averaged somewhere probably around $600 to $800 billion a year. So they've gotten trillions and trillions of dollars, and that's not including the wars entirely. So they cannot account for all this money. Where did it go?
Yeah.
Frankly, I think they still hold some of it. The corruption of that is outrageous. You would go to jail if you could not pass the kinds of audits that the Defense Department alone cannot pass. You would go to jail. It is absolutely crazy that the government who would jail you for that kind of fraud
is doing it themselves.
Commits it every day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're all out of time for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more. Till then, take care.